Hi, Misha here, and in the comments section of my recent video on the Soviet-Russian SVT Tokarev, more than a few people mentioned this gun, the Swedish AG model 42, often known in the West as the Ljungman or Ljungman. So, yeah, why don't we talk about it? It has a lot going for it, but it also has a few things that would have probably not allowed it to ever become the best self-loading rifle of the World War II period. But it was one of the standard issue guns in Sweden for about 2 decades. Well, I got nothing to do. Let's talk about a cool old gun. Now, this video is not really going to delve into Mausers. That's for another thing. But I will say, Sweden was one of the first nations to adopt the modern Mauser, doing the 1894 carbine and the 1896 rifle, both firing a new and very good 6.5 millimeter round-nosed projectile. Well, by the 1930s, short rifles were king, and Sweden adopted this. Initially, it was the M96-38, or just M38, short rifle. It had the barrel down to about 24.5 inches. So, yeah, in between, which is what short rifles are good at. The first ones are actually cut down Gustav rifles. And then Husqvarna would make purpose-built M38s during the World War II period. So they were modernizing a bit. Another thing, in 1941, they officially replaced that round-nose projectile with a new Spitzer 6.5 millimeter projectile. And Sweden was pretty up to date. They witnessed developments with the M1 Garand in the USA. France had been working on self-loading rifles since even before World War I, on and off, but very slowly. And Russia had some interesting results, first with the AVS-36, and was soon to adopt the SVT-38. And so Sweden thought, we're pretty much neutral, we're a small nation, but Germany's arming up. So as early as 1938 is the time they're going to the short rifle. There's an idea to go to a self-loading, mass-production infantry rifle. And like a lot of nations, especially back in World War I, considered, they did look at ways of maybe just converting their bolt-action Mausers to be self-loaders. But as other nations had learned before, it's just not practicable. So with that, by 1940-41, trials were underway. The government made it known what they wanted. And that's where a gentleman named Eric Eklund comes in. Eklund worked for a factory known as Ljungman or Ljungman. In very short order, he created a prototype that very much resembles the production Model 42 here. And we're going to look at the mechanics a wee bit because you kind of have to with these guns. But it has a tilting or tipping, what we'll call tilting. That actually is a good, hey, combining words. It's very German of me. Bolt system, almost directly copied from the SVT-38. It also has a true direct gas impingement system. And this was inspired by various French prototypes. And of course would go into full production in France, first with the MOS 44 and then really with the MOS 49. But it wasn't the first direct impingement, but it was a unique system, and it's non-adjustable, just, tipping bolt. And it had a detachable 10-round magazine. Although from the get-go, they were mostly planning to issue just one mag per gun, maybe a spare, and to top it off with chargers, stripper clips. And from the get-go, because of the new cartridge, they calibrated this to work with both the original round nose 6.5 and the new Spitzer 6.5, because it would take them a couple of years to have enough in service, and no one knew what was going to happen. 1940-41, Germany's on the rise. Sweden's neutral, but that doesn't really mean a lot with Germany. Just ask Russia. So they're hedging their bets. They trial a few guns, and the Eklund rifle was selected in 1942. Now, the Ljungman factory wasn't set up for mass production, so once the government selected the gun, it was transferred to the state arsenal, the Carl Gustav Arsenal, and put into production by the end of 1942. In 1943, it would be in full scale. All right, so what do we have here? Like the M38 short rifle, this has about a 24.5-inch barrel. And it has an overall length of just shy of 48 inches. So pretty standard, but not short. Has a semi-pistol grip stock. Very thick stock. And this thing weighs 10.5 pounds. Unloaded. No bayonet. Throw a bayonet on there. Put 10 cartridges in the magazine. Call it 12 pounds. This is not a light gun. But it is robust, I'll give it that. Has a lot of typical Swedish features. It took the standard Swedish Mauser bayonet. Interestingly, the barrel has an integrated muzzle brake here. Ported barrel, I guess you could call it. Has a protected front sight that is drift adjustable. And it has a knob adjustable rear sight. And they were pretty reasonable with the ranges. 800 meters. Actual, realistic ranges on this thing. Intermediate length handguard. Took essentially the same sling. Steel butt plate. No trapdoor in it. And as you saw, it has the typical unit disc that tells information, including bore condition. Because like all Swedish guns, they wanted to keep these in tip-top shape. And finally, we have a safety back here. And boy howdy, is this safety really important. So with that, let's talk about some of the mechanics. I had read about these a long time before actually running across one in person. And just reading about them doesn't do this action justice. And this is my first gun. In fact, this is the first Ljungman I ever held myself. And we'll get to why it's called the Ljungman in the USA. I picked this up at the store. I just knew I was going to go home with it because it's just so weird and cool. And I always was a fan of 6.5. And as you know, to charge this guy, you push your, what looks to be a dust cover, forward. That leaves kind of an open back here. And then, once you get it forward, you pull it back. And you'll feel resistance. Now notice, nothing happened there. That's because we're on an empty mag. And if you think I'm sticking my finger in there, you are insane. Now to take our mag out, now this is of course the later B mag. They did modify this later with 2 latches, front and a rear. There we go. Once that's out, push it forward slightly and then pull it back and wham. Essentially, when you charge it, this is moving forward with spring tension, then it locks to your bolt carrier, and then actually pulling it back, the tension's not there because it's in between the 2 pieces, it's contained. And then it goes forward. Why did they do this? In the cold, I mean, you're not going to accidentally short stroke it. And of course, when the gun cycles in semi-auto, this piece just moves back and forth here It's not really going to get caught on anything. It has a really good design elegance to it. Really does. But what if you don't want it to do that? Well, then you flip your safety on, and now it doesn't do it. I'm still going to put my finger in there though, because if you take your safety off, it'll do it. It's really a fun action. I mean, if you can't understand why this wouldn't intrigue a mechanically oriented person, a gun person, then yeah. Now, typically you wouldn't take your mag out to recharge it. You would load with stripper clips. So you'll be pressing down in that area. You really want your safety on for pretty obvious reasons. So let's disassemble it and talk a little bit about the bolt system. Much like on a Mauser, the safety is part of your disassembly, but there's no real firm notch in the middle. What you need to do is move it to the middle and then pull your carrier up just a bit. Easier said than done on camera, right guys? There we go. And this block comes off. And your bolt carrier with spring comes out of the back. Kind of neat. It's a braided spring, something you don't typically see for World War II. But again, these were designed to work well in the cold in the Arctic, which has conditions all its own. Yeah, there we go. And then now that we've taken the teeth out of the carrier, it's safe. And it just slides out of the back. And it separates, much as you would find on many other guns. Your bolt carrier here is just this kind of flat piece, machined. Here's the gas cup in the front. And here is our tilting tipping bolt with a spring-loaded firing pin. And that's it. Not much left in the receiver except our trigger group. And there's the end of the gas tube and the chamber. And again, we have a 10 round double stack, double feed magazine with an automatic last round hold open device, which does activate a trip here. It's a pretty advanced gun for its day and time, and also very simple, very big and blocky and simple. I see a lot of French inspiration in this, because if you look at the MAS 40 prototype and the MAS 44, they kind of go with the same big and simple direct impingement tilting tipping bolt system. And now back together. Putting it together, you can really feel all the machined just craftsmanship that goes into this. Mag goes in nice and easy too. And again, once it's in, you have a bolt hold open feature. Now what you would do if you wanted to load it in the military, put it on safe, make sure it's on safe, and you'll be safe. So safety has a couple of meanings with this gun. Sorry, kind of taking the mag out. It's not that difficult when you're using it, but when you're trying to do it on camera here, yeah, it's a thing. Free floated, but fun thing, if you put your safety off, there it is, right back, because it's just a nub that hits the back of it. And that is our basically automatic rifle model 1942, is adopted in Sweden. Mass production would be in 1943 and run through 1944, but the bulk of these would be built in 43, and they would turn out 30,000. Now, why did they only do 30,000 after developing it? Well, I think it was mostly just to see if they could. It was more of a threat to show that they could make a self-loading rifle. Keep in mind, in 1942, Germany only had the Gewehr 41. And 30,000 was enough to equip their frontline troops that were on the border. Could they make more? Sure. But they didn't need to. Because by 1944, Germany was on the defensive and was really no longer a threat to Sweden. So they made what they needed. They proved that they could do it. And that was good enough. So these would be in frontline troops. The M38 would be everyone else, artillery. And then, of course, in 1945, they would introduce the Carl Gustaf M45 submachine gun, commonly known as the Swedish K. So that gave troops another defensive gun. They would keep these around, keep using what they had. And they addressed a few problems, or they noticed a few problems that they would address. And it's amazing that there weren't more than what they found, frankly. The biggest one, originally the gas tube was made of carbon steel. Now, in 1942-43, Sweden had to be very careful with its steel. It was limited supply. This is actually why its M40 Lottie pistols had issues. That's a story for another video. So they decided to replace that with a stainless steel gas tube. And while they were at it, they made a few other updates and changes. Some small, like they went away from the proprietary cleaning rod to just a standard M38 Mauser cleaning rod here. They also added that secondary front catch, making new magazines for these because, you know, the mags that were in the guns have been used for a while. Good time to replace them anyway, and while we're doing it, might as well update the magazine. They also gave it that stronger recoil spring, that braided spring we looked at. They also a little bit improved the extractor. Why not? And they improved the sight adjustment with this handy-dandy, easy-to-use wheel. And finally, they also added these bumps on the top cover, the charging cover. Originally, they were just serrated plates on here. It's pretty easy to understand why those would be better in the cold than with gloves on. And back over to this side for one other thing. They added a rubber bumper to the brass deflector. There was always a case deflector here, but it was just steel before. Well, they made this, they gave it a little rubber cover. And for the brass disc, they would continue to update not just unit info, but mostly the gun's condition. That's what the discs are used for. So the guns got a bit of a overhaul. The design was kind of created in the early 50s. In 1953, the changes were accepted as the AG-42B. And while the production was long over, they would bring guns in batches and overhaul them at the Gustaf factory between 1953 and 1956. And since there was only 30,000, well, not quite that many, some had been lost over time because, well, infantry, military. But, you know, it didn't take them all that long. And they would go back into service and be in frontline use along with the Mauser up until the 1960s when they were finally replaced by the AK-4, which was a license-produced derivative of the Heckler & Koch G3. And it would take a little time to replace those. Now, they would convert a few AG M42s to 7.62 NATO for targeting, testing, training, just to see if they could sometimes, I think. But the majority were kept in 6.5 and then kept in good shape and put into storage. And it's kind of where we're at today. A very neat little footnote. But this would not have been the best mass build creation gun. The hand-chewing action aside, can you imagine Russian conscripts trying to deal with that? It's a heavy gun, so if you got a military like Sweden that's going to be fighting a defensive war, it's stationary fortifications, great. They're not moving a lot. But if you're having to march across Europe, yeah, 12 pounds with a bayonet stuck on, not great. It also was pretty time consuming and resource intensive to mass produce. It required a lot of steel for the action, the barrel, and these are made to a very high degree. It also required a lot of high quality wood for the furniture. So, yeah, probably not the best, although these were well suited for the cold. Kind of reminds me of a lot of the Swiss guns. They're great for Switzerland. This was great for Sweden, but it would have cost too much for someone to make in the millions, which is what the US, Britain, Germany, Russia would have required. But for a smaller nation like Sweden with a relatively small army, and just to show that they could do it in the middle of a war, exceedingly impressive. But unfortunately, pretty much a design dead end. That's one thing I really like about older guns, is how different they are. Even the bolt actions, if you look at what the US was doing, what Britain was doing, Russia, Japan, everyone had their own little take. Even if a lot of them were derived from the Mauser, they had their own little twists. Modern guns are very homogeneous. There are differences, of course, but back then this was a lot of fun, just to collect all the different styles and systems. Now, of course, someone's going to say, and probably already has commented, what about Egypt and the Hakim and the Rashid? Nah, that can be for another video. Yes, they did essentially not just sell the production rights to Egypt. They actually gave them all the tooling, meaning they were totally done with it. And Egypt would actually produce a larger number than Sweden. But even in Egypt, they didn't see a whole lot of combat use. By the time they were ready to go, Egypt was already shifting more towards the comm block and eventually would produce the AK, and that would supersede anything by the 1970s. But it's cool that they did. It really is cool. So I get why people like this gun. I love this gun. It's mechanically cool. The craftsmanship behind it is just outstanding. The wood furniture, just a hard piece of wood. You can tell that Sweden, while they might have had a bit of a resource crisis, they weren't being bombed. They weren't being attacked. They could have been, and that was the point behind this and other things that they did. But they weren't. So they were able to lavish a little more love and care. But it has to be said that Eklund and Carl Gustav did an excellent job of taking this from the drawing board into full production in just a couple of years. And it was so good out of the gate. But it's also good because it's very blocky and solid. As for the name Ljungman, that's been applied in the USA for decades. Best anyone can tell, it's from old advertisements when importers like Inner Arms started bringing these in. For whatever reason, they chose to go with that factory name over any others. Maybe just because it was unique. Kind of like how Grey Ghost was applied to those French P-38s. It stuck, and at some point when a name sticks long enough, it may not be correct, but if you say Ljungman, people know what you mean. And at the end of the day, that's the point of language. That's the point of words, is to convey a meaning. When you say that word, this image comes into a gun person's head, and that means it's successful. It's stuck. I mean, technically, Garand isn't correct for the M1 rifle. A lot of things aren't. But that's humans for you. Heck, 3040 Craig, said all the time. Not correct. It's 30 U.S. Army. Yada yada. But yeah, it comes from when these were imported, and these mostly came into the U.S. ages ago, 70s, 80s, 90s, which is great. It means they either have no import mark or small ones. And, of course, they didn't have to be butchered for any political reasons or anything goofiness like that. We're able to have these just as they were. But they were pretty much only used by Sweden. A few of them were kind of given to partisans in exile in Europe, but in very small numbers. This was almost exclusively a Swedish military rifle. And definitely, I would say, certainly a better gun than the Gewehr 41, arguably better than the Gewehr 43, more durable, probably more accurate too than the SVT 40, and probably easier to clean and maintain, and maybe better in the cold than the M1 Garand. But of course, again, it's heavy, it's very resource intensive to produce, and it likes to eat hands. I've never done it, although a couple of times, especially when I got it new 20 years ago, I probably came very close. It's a terrifying prospect, but it's also a really cool system. And when used properly, you can understand why they did it. There's no outside moving parts. This doesn't move. This only moves, but it's slick inside here. And I think that was kind of the point. But yeah, people mention this in the comments. Haven't had it out for a video in a while. Why not? Definitely one I won't be selling anytime soon. My own AG-42 Ljungman. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you could, do please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.